Welcome to our special week, Hope and Healing for Mental Health. Today's show is so powerful that we stretched it into an hour. And we'll tell you more about that in just a moment. But first, Daniel Whitehead, welcome back.
So good to be back. So good to be with you.
We love having you here this week, and we're really excited about today. Now, of course, as the CEO of Sanctuary Mental Health Ministries, you have so much insight into this mental health conversation. Today, we're touching on a very sensitive topic. Lara sits down with author, speaker, co-founder of Saddleback Church, Kay Warren, to talk about her devastating experience of losing her son to suicide. Now, I was here on the day we recorded that interview, and I can tell you the impact was huge, and there was a live audience, and a lot of people have experienced something similar with someone in their life, and so I know that this is going to hit a lot of people.
Absolutely, yeah. The rates of suicide in the last 12 years have increased, and it really is deeply concerning for all of us to see that reality.
Yeah, and so we want to bring you some insight, some encouragement today. We're going to feature that conversation in 2 parts over the next hour. And I want you to know that you are going to leave changed. Even if it's just learning how to walk with someone else going through grief, if it's your own grief, either way, she has so much honesty and wisdom to share. And today we'll also be talking about the importance of close relationships and how they impact our mental health. So to kick it off, I have a question for you, Daniel. I do this to Joe Amaral, our other host, but today I thought let's put Daniel Whitehead on the spot.
Ready.
Okay, if you were walking down a park or a street and you saw a sign that said no cost listening, what would you do?
I'd probably start talking.
Would you?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
I love that.
Free therapy. That's good.
Well, that is amazing because a retired Nova Scotia social worker traveled right across Canada last year on what he called a listening tour. Now, his name is Paul Jenkinson, and he set up in public spaces with 2 chairs, a folding table, and a sandwich board that said, "You are not alone. I will listen." I already feel like that feels very comforting to have that written down. And he relied on the generosity of strangers along the way to keep him going right across Canada.
Wow. You know, it amazes me that he was able to travel 23,000 kilometres, and so many Canadians celebrated him and took him into their homes or funded his outreach. He said it stayed with people who had very little, and he stayed in mansions. But he said the kindness of Canadians really stayed with him. He kept an open heart, an open mind, and made some great connections.
Canada, you're amazing. We just want you to know that. He also gave out some Jolly Ranchers and about $2,400 worth of Subway cards to those who are experiencing food insecurity. But I believe the greatest gift he did give was listening, because so many of us today don't have the time or the mental and emotional resources and the patience to do it. And we all need to have somebody listen to us.
That's right. We're going to break down why that matters in a little bit. But first, here's part 1 of Lara's interview with Kay Warren.
Kay Warren is an author, speaker, and co-founder of Saddleback Church with her husband, Rick. But more than any title, Kay is a mother, and that role has shaped her story in both profound pain and remarkable purpose. After the heartbreaking loss of her son, Matthew, she founded Hope for Brighter Tomorrows, a ministry that comes alongside families impacted by mental illness and suicide. Today, Kay is here to share her personal story with us and to remind us that when our hope is rooted in Jesus, there is strength for even the hardest road. Kay, welcome back to 100 Huntley Street.
Thank you so much for the invitation, Laura.
Kay, it's such an honor to be speaking with you right now and on such a tender story in your life and a very tender topic for many people. Your husband, Rick Warren, wrote a very important book in my life, The Purpose-Driven Life, and loved that book, going to Bible college. And you guys started a very significant church together, Saddleback Church. Tell us a little bit about your early life together in family life and ministry calling.
We started Saddleback with the idea that we were going to be very honest about our real lives. And that's because we had marriage problems from the honeymoon on. And so it was bad. It was just bad. We call it the marriage from hell. And I'm not kidding. It really was bad. And then we got help and began to learn how to build a healthy marriage. So when we started Saddleback, like 4 years later, we're like, we're going to tell everybody the truth about our whole lives, that we're not perfect people. We need the Lord just as much as anybody else. Our marriage isn't perfect, and we have a real family. So that's what we did for 43 years. Yeah. And so it was the greatest privilege of my life, actually, was being at Saddleback all those years and to raise our family there.
You had 3 kids. One is in heaven,
Yes.
and 2 are here. Your openness and authenticity about the journey that you've had with your son Matthew and the experiences you had has reflected the openness you and your husband said you would have in ministry, that you would tell the truth about what's gone on and what is happening. Can you take us back to the early days for Matthew as you began to identify, or he understood he was having mental health challenges or mental illness?
Well, he was diagnosed when he was 7 with depression. And he could actually, looking back, I think he could have been diagnosed when he was maybe 3 or 4 if we had understood that children can experience mental illness. We didn't know that they could. We knew he was different from his older siblings. We knew he had some behavior that was, my goodness, we didn't know what to do with it. We didn't know how to figure it out. But it never occurred to us that it had anything to do with his mental health. Until when he was 7, he began coming home from school and telling me every day that he was sad. And it didn't stop. He just kept being more and more sad and stopped. He lost interest in playing games, playing with his friends, schools. I mean, everything just began to decline. And I finally asked our children's pastor, can children experience mental illness? And she said they can. And so we went to his pediatrician. He was diagnosed with depression. Soon after that, it felt like every year some other diagnosis as his mental health decreased. He had panic attacks, panic disorder. He was diagnosed with early onset bipolar, OCD, suicidality, body dysmorphic disorder, borderline person. I mean, he just received this string of diagnosis after diagnosis after diagnosis. And really what that says is that his mental illness was very complicated. I don't know that those were all the perfect diagnoses every time, but what I knew was I had a child who was suffering greatly, who was tortured and tormented in his mind, who lived with this depression that would not, no matter what we did, no matter how many doctor visits, no matter what medications, no matter what modifications we made in school. I mean, I feel like we twisted ourselves into pretzels trying to get him what he needed. And his prayer as a little boy just was, God, I just want to be normal. Why can't I be like other kids? And so he suffered and struggled. His siblings suffered and struggled alongside of him. We as his parents suffered and struggled. And it just kept escalating. There would be periods of time in which he was more stable. And I used to say healthy Matthew was hilarious and funny and compassionate and loved nothing better than to, walk around a corner and scare me and, make me jump. I mean, that was just his greatest delight, was to somehow get me. And creative and generous. Healthy Matthew was an amazing person. Unhealthy Matthew, particularly as the years went by, became someone that we barely knew and actually was pretty dangerous to himself and to others. And it just became this drumbeat toward, it felt like suicide might actually be something that was going to be part of his life, even though that was an unbearable thought. Yeah. He never found that place over 20 years, from the time he was 7 to the time he was 27. Life was just excruciating.
And Kay, I think of you as a mom through those 20 years, probably lying in bed at night, having thoughts, probably thoughts out of control. How do I protect my son? How do I help him? God, why aren't you stopping this? What was that journey like for you as a mom in those 20 years, as well as, you've talked about how you were Matthew's person. You were the person who spoke to him every time he was in crisis.
Yeah. I think I felt so helpless, increasingly. I just felt so helpless. I did not know what to do. I did everything I knew to do. I studied, I learned, I talked to people, and I did try to be there for him. I was there for him. I sacrificed myself. If anybody's watching this and they're a mom or a dad or a sibling or a wife or a husband of someone who has a mental illness, you know how much you sacrifice yourself for their well-being, just trying so hard to to make it better for them. And there were nights. I had a chair in my home office, and about this size, and I called it my worry chair, because I would be up at night. Maybe I didn't know where he was. Maybe he'd disappear for days or weeks at a time, or he'd be mad and wouldn't answer, so we didn't know if he was alive or dead. Didn't know where he was. And that was, I realized after a few years, actually many years of that constant type of thing, that I wasn't sure what would happen to my faith or to my marriage if Matthew did die. Because Rick and I had the most conflict through the years about Matthew and how to handle his mental illness. And so our marriage was always struggling because we just didn't see things the same way. And I felt as he began to talk more and more about suicide, it's like, I don't know that I can survive. And a friend one day, we were doing just a little bit of shopping, and we were in this store, and she saw this, I saw this box that says hope on it. And I said, oh, I need that. I need a hope box. I need a hope box. But it was, I don't know, it was expensive, and I put it back and said, nah, I'm not going to buy that. And a couple of days later, she showed up with it. She had bought it for me. And she said, I want you to fill this with verses that will give you hope. And so for hope in the night, for those night moments when I was just in despair, worried about the future, worried about what was going to happen, couldn't remember a single Bible verse, where they were found. I wrote them out on little 3x5 cards, and I began to fill my hope box with verses. And so as I'm up in the night, I would open that box and read these verses, because I realized there were some holes in my faith. I've been a Christian since I was a little girl, but I felt like my faith might not be strong enough to handle it if he should die. And so I was trying to shore up my faith with these verses about hope and God's answers to prayer and God's promises. And then that hope box kept me going for a long time.
And Kay, if you're comfortable to take us back to April 5th, 2013, all the hope you'd been storing up hit a big wall because your worst fear came true.
Yeah.
And Matthew did take his life.
Yeah.
And died by suicide.
Yeah.
Can you take us back to the days leading up to that and that journey as much as you're comfortable with sharing?
The day before he died, he had come over to our house for dinner, and made him something that he really liked. And I'd bought him some new towels. He'd been complaining about his towels, and I bought him some towels. And he said he was going to get a new phone that weekend, and he had a date with somebody that he had met online. And so he was kind of looking forward to some things. But then as he finished dinner, he just put his head down on the table and he just said, I'm so tired. I'm so tired. We kissed him goodbye. He went home. Within a few hours, he was texting me, telling me that he was going to take his life, and it seemed pretty serious. He'd attempted many times by that time and been hospitalized and all those things, but this was a particularly scary time. And I got my husband out of bed, and I said, we have to go over to his house. Rick had pneumonia, and he was really ill and did not want to get out of bed, and especially since we had done this so many times. And I could see his lights were on in his house, and I could see the bag of towels through the window. And but he didn't answer the door, and he didn't respond. And I was terrified that he had taken his life, but he wasn't answering. He had also made threats that if we called authorities, that he would institute a death by cop, that he would force them into a situation to take his life. So that's why I didn't call that night. So I just went back to my worry chair, and I stayed up all night weeping and begging the Lord for this to not be true. But the next day when I couldn't, he didn't answer, he didn't show up at work, he didn't show up for his workout, I knew. And so at that point I did call. And we went to his house, and the very horrible reality was he had taken his life. And when the officers confirmed that, I hit the ground. I hit the ground. This terrible thing that we had worked so hard, prayed so hard, done everything that we could do, loved him. If love could have kept him alive, he would be here today. That was really one of the things, I know I'm jumping ahead, but that's one of the things that I had to come to realize we did as parents.
we could not have loved him any more than we did. And if love could have saved him, he would have. It wasn't. He was ill, and he was in terrible, terrible pain, and he reached a point at which he couldn't see any way out of the pain or that it would ever be any different. And it launched us into catastrophic grief.
Yeah.
Absolute catastrophic grief.
This grief hit you and your husband and your kids significantly. What did that look like in your family as it was in the following days? What did it look like as that grief was unfolding?
There's, I don't know, there's this shock that it's kind of God's mercy and grace that the body shuts down a little bit in shock, you know. So you're feeling things, but you're not completely there. I don't know if you've experienced that, but so we were both in this shock of this cannot be true. This cannot be true. And then also the crushing realization of, oh my gosh, this is true. And so we just alternated, I think, for a while between that absolute shock of, no, this is not true, and the horrible reality of, no, it is true. And so we made it through the funeral, the memorial service. It became national news in the United States. It was a scrolling banner on CNN that, the son of Pastor Rick Warren had died by suicide. So it was public knowledge and news, and we were just, I don't know, I thought there are these moments in that kind of grief where you think, I will never stop crying. But then on the other hand, you're like, how can there be any more tears that come out because I've cried so much? How could there be any more tears? And yet there are. I had lost, Rick's parents and my parents. They died of cancer, but the thing is, they died in their bed, surrounded by family, loved, cared for, every need taken care of, hugs, kisses, all the sweetness of those moments, the bittersweetness of saying an earthly goodbye, but in that, and to know that Matthew died alone and in extreme agony, it's a different kind of, it has layers. So catastrophic loss is loss that's complicated by these other factors that add trauma and sorrow and unbearable pain.
Yeah. And in your advocacy work, you point out that people who have gone through similar experiences to yours would experience this kind of catastrophic grief, which is at a whole other level of unraveling your world, unraveling your relationships. One of the things you touched on a few moments ago is you didn't know if your faith could stand if you lost Matthew by suicide. And I think a lot of people who experience a loss to suicide, if they are a person of faith and follow Jesus, they have a lot of questions for God. What were some of those questions circulating for you?
Well, it started with my hope box, which was full of verses, and I felt like hope mocked me. I would walk into my home office and this box is sitting, and I just felt like it completely mocked me. Like hope was gone. Matthew's dead. Where's the hope? There is no, he's gone. And I took the verses out of there. I thought I threw them away. A few months later, I found them tucked into the bottom of a drawer. I didn't throw them away, but I tucked them away. And I took them out of here because they weren't, it's not that God's word wasn't true, but they weren't true for Matthew, if that makes sense. Because they were all about him living. They were all about him being healed here. And that isn't what happened. So I took those verses out, and now I have this empty hope box. It's not only mocking me because what I prayed for didn't happen, but now it's empty. And that was really hard. People sometimes ask me if I was angry at God. And there came a point in which I was, that I'll talk about in just a second. But I think my first response after the shock was just this deep hurt. Like, God is my best friend. Jesus, you're my best friend. You have let me down massively. What? And from there, it moved to that, from that hurt place, like I had just been so let down and betrayed by my relationship with God, to then it's like, well, what do I do with that? What good were all those prayers? What good were those years of sitting in that worry chair, weeping and crying out to God only to have him die. What good was it? What did it mean? Why didn't God could have intervened? God could have stopped him. God's powerful. God could have made it so that he wasn't able to take his life. And I could have talked him off the ledge like I had done so many other times. Why? Why did God allow a little boy of 7 to live with such crushing depression when really all he ever wanted was to be a normal person? So those were the questions that began to haunt me and began to just circulate in my brain. And it felt like nobody had any answers. In fact, nobody did. It didn't matter who I talked to. It didn't matter what I read in Scripture. It did nothing. All I could see was this empty hope box and my faith, which was shaken by these unanswered questions. And I have these amazing friends. So one bought me the hope box. Somebody else bought me this, what she called my mystery pot. And she said, it's, this is a Le Creuset. It's not product placement, but that just is if you recognize it. And the point is, the crucible, it means the crucible. And she said, that's what your faith is going through the hottest fire. It's going through the crucible. And you have questions that you don't have answers for. So you've got to do something with them. And I began to write them on little strips of paper. And I put them inside my mystery pot. Because nobody on earth could answer it satisfactorily, not to my satisfaction. They could answer, but they felt trite. It felt stupid. It felt like, you don't get it. You don't get the level of this kind of agony with God. And so I began to write them out and put them in my mystery pot. And they sit there today. Because God can handle my questions. God could handle those questions 12 years ago. He could handle when I was questioning his goodness, when I was questioning his kindness, questioning his power. God can handle that. But the thing that I love is that I went to him with those questions. I didn't run from him. I ran to him. And in the safety of his embrace, because God, I'm his beloved, even though I don't understand it. But in the safety of his embrace, I think of a toddler in a grocery store and having a fit. Just having a fit. And the parents are like, and some parents will grab the kid and go, stop that, and the kid doesn't stop, but then they, leave the store with the kid still screaming and the parents embarrassed and all that. But God's not that kind of a parent. He scoops you up and goes, okay, look me in the eye. I've got you. I've got you. So God had me. And in the safety of his arms, I took those questions. Some of them I threw in his face. Some of them I screamed. Some of them I yelled. Some of them I wept through. But in the safety of God's arms, he and I wrestled together so that even though the tree of my faith was shaken, the roots held. The roots held. So when Jeremiah 17, 5-8 talks about that if you have your confidence in yourself, when hard times come, you're going to be like a tumbleweed and you're going to blow away. But the person who has sent their roots deep into the goodness and the character of God, even when the tree of your faith is shaken by circumstances that feel unbearable, the roots can hold. And so I've repopulated my hope box. It has other verses. And they don't have anything to do with life here. 1 Corinthians 15:43 was the first verse I put in here. It says, these bodies of ours are buried in brokenness, but they will be raised in glory. They are buried in weakness, but they will be raised in strength. And I could put that in here and say, that's right. God, Matthew's body was buried in brokenness, but he will be raised in glory because he had put his faith in Jesus. He was buried in weakness. He will be raised in strength. I can hold on to that. Yeah. I have fewer verses in my hope box, but they are verses that are completely about the goodness of God and his promises for the life to come, where all of this will be made right. Yeah. And until then, I live with mystery, but I live with mystery and hope. And that, I think, produces a gritty faith. If you just have hope, but it's never been tested by the fire, if you've never had those wrestling moments where you and God have gone to the mat and you've wondered if you're going to survive, then all you have is untested optimism. But if you only have mystery and you don't have the hope, your faith will become bitter and brittle and dry, and it will be shaken. We have to have hope and mystery together. And that is a gritty faith that can carry us through.
What a powerful conversation. I love what Kay said. Her roots were shaken. Her tree was shaken, but her roots held. And I think you're probably with me, needed to grab a Kleenex, and just loving her honesty, because we're not always feeling, Daniel, strong in faith when we're going through hard times. We don't always feel like we're going to overcome. But I just want to encourage you that even if you are not in speaking terms with God, even if you are in the midst of that crucible moment where you have nothing in your hope box and only questions in your crucible, we would just love to pray with you. And you don't have to do anything but just call the number or send an email and just say, please hold me up. I don't even have the words, and I don't even know if my faith will survive this. And I think that God appreciates that honesty, because He knows. He knows what's in our heart and what you're going through. Will you give that number a call right now? 1-866-273-4444. You can email us at prayer@crossroads.ca. We will hold you in prayer in this season of your life, whatever you're facing. And I hope from that you took that we can be real with God, even when our tree and our faith is being shaken.
Amen to that.
Powerful conversation. I know you know Kay very well. What an incredible, honest, raw telling of the worst moment of her life.
Absolutely. I think, there are moments like these that are so sacred and so holy that it's hard to have words, right? When you've witnessed that level of vulnerability. And Kay does such an incredible job of modeling that for the body of Christ around the world.
And you would think with her, with her role, that she would feel pressure almost to act like she had it all together all through it. And I think it speaks to her strength of character that she doesn't, and how much comfort that brings us who have been shaken at different hard times in our life. And, it brings me to we were going to talk about pillar number 3 today that you teach through Sanctuary, which is kind of this idea, companionship over solutions. Like, rather than having to give everyone the perfect answer to the hard thing in their life.
Yeah.
We're bringing presence.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Kay talked about that really well when she said, there are no answers to this. And the attempt to try and put words to something as awful as that would be trite or misplaced. And I think it really speaks to this idea that to be with someone is probably the best gift you can give them, just to be present and to witness their suffering with them.
Yeah, and I think, I have been in those situations where there are people that I love, and I want to encourage them in some way. I want to help them in some way, and I don't know what to do. What do you suggest that we do in that moment?
I think in those moments, you can do as I did when Kay first shared her story with me, when I first met Kay a few years ago, and she shared that story and she wept, and we all wept together. I think you can just be present, to show empathy, to validate those feelings, and to say, yes, these feelings are absolutely right, and I'm with you in them.
Yeah, I think that's really wise. Well, we want to keep investing in your mental health, and we're going to dive deeper into that pillar of companionship in the next half hour. But I just want to remind you of this incredible resource that we're offering this week, which is our Faith and Mental Health Bible Study. Such a beautiful way to invest in our spiritual life and mental health. It includes video teachings to accompany the study. You can download your copy at crossroads.ca/study guide. Now we're going to hear the rest of Kay Warren's story and her interview, and how even that pain is being used to encourage other people in dark places. You're going to want to stay tuned for that, so don't go away.
Thank you for your ongoing support of Crossroads, a supporter-funded nonprofit organization and member of the Canadian Centre for Christian Charities. Thanks to faithful people like you, we are able to continue producing 100 Huntley Street. You can write to Crossroads, P.O. Box 5100, Burlington, Ontario, L7R4M2, or visit crossroads.ca to learn more about our programs.